Hi lovelies and welcome to the Witch's Cookery. Remember the video I made just last week about how we should really embrace the choice of summer and not rush into autumn? Well, F that! The weather has decided differently, so here we go. I mean, fall is of course full on witch vibes, but late rainy summer days have their own charm, as they bestow this peculiar longing upon us that makes you crave everything magical and a cozy embrace of autumn. It has been wet, cold, windy, and to be honest, the perfect weather to sit inside with some hot coffee, some freshly baked yumminess, and to practice a special type of magic I like to call escapism. Being playful and diving headfirst into a comforting fantasy with all your senses as a form of self-care and practical magic. Speaking of which, this week I'll finally get around to watch two must-watch witch movies from the 90s, Practical Magic and The Craft, peppered with some early episodes of Charmed, and we'll have a look how much actual real-life witchcraft is hidden in those stories. I want to dream of days long gone and times that never happened, with a bit of fitting kitchen witchery, a full-on 90s movie-inspired ritual for self-empowerment, and of course some glamour magic. Because to completely live out this 90s witchy fantasy, we first need an appropriate wardrobe for the week. Come along and we'll scour my wardrobe for some old and new treasures. So someone who has lived through the 90s and early noughties and has first-hand experience with the fashion back then, was not a big fan back then. Not quite sure if I'm loving the comeback of it all at the moment. However, I had a little fun, played around and discovered a new style for me. I'd say this is probably subcategorized as Whimsigoth. Lots of textures, velvet, fur, knitwear. The very colorful, pattern-heavy, celestial, crystal bejeweled type of 90s witch or spiritualist. Think Phoebe and Friends, the aunts in Practical Magic. Throw in a little bit of Luna Lovegood and Molly Weasley and you're basically there. And if these earrings weren't so dang heavy, it would actually be a very comfortable look. Get your quirk on, think Buffy the Vampire Slayer. What was her friend called again? The one with the bucket hats and crazy clothes. Lots of these like front buckled dresses and trousers. Oversized jumpers. Then of course we also have the cooler looks inspired by the school uniforms, the craft, black and white, occult jewelry, leather, everything, short and tight. Personally gonna leave this look to the younger and or less hourglass shaped ladies. But why are we doing this little fashion show? Well, next to this random urge I felt to go through all of my old jewelry and kind of like get a couple of clothes out of my closet or repurpose them for new outfits, I also wanted to talk a little bit more about glamour magic. Glamour magic describes every type of spell or activity done with magical intent that is there to change how either you feel about yourself or how other people perceive you. And one of my favorite ways to do that is actually through clothing, jewelry, makeup. It gives you the opportunity to step into different roles and play a little bit with them, kind of as if you were to try on a dress to see how it fits you. And if you've ever been in costume, you also know what powers that can have. Suddenly you feel like in character. You dare to act differently. You suddenly unlock potential and a deep slumbering personas in you that you didn't necessarily know you had, but that you know now live there and you can tap into when you need them. And one very valuable sentence to remember is: dress not for how you feel, but for how you want to feel. Meaning, whether shit you're feeling kind of like low energy, it's like all blech, and your urge would be to like get into your, you know, joggers, chumpwear is probably a different type of attire, and your joggers and your chumpers and your oversized everything to just be comfortable and on the couch, and that's fine too. But if you want to get out of that blue mood, if you actually want to get into more the action mode or feel the magic, play around with it. Get into your little witchy outfit, put on the jewels. Next thing you might know, you might be dancing underneath the moon or setting up a fancy ritual. Or, you know, just brewing some love potions with a friend. Now, after watching Practical Magic and search for some kitchen witchery, I was not disappointed. I mean, did you see the amount of bread that they had in that basket in the kitchen? And what a gorgeous kitchen it was. And the idea of chocolate cake or brownies for breakfast to make the world seem alright is also something that I could completely approve of as a kitchen witch. I mean, have you read Harry Potter? It's basically Madame Pomfrey's heal all as well. So I was torn between witching up some midnight margaritas or a breakfast chocolate cake, but since even the thought of tequila nowadays gives me like a 3-day hangover, and I feel that rainy weather calls for something warm and comforting that you can snack on while binging some old 90s classic, I decided on an extra chocolatey brownie cake. Sprinkle in a bit of salt for protection, some cinnamon for luck, and chop up some nuts for the extra crunch. As always, you can find my recipe in the description box underneath this video. Plus, I also linked to a wonderfully nostalgic 90s Whimsigoth playlist for Spotify so that you can listen and dance to appropriate music while you swing your kitchen witch wand. You want to measure out your main ingredients, which are melted butter with chocolate, flour, sugar and eggs. Anything else like spices, chopped chocolates or nuts can be added to your liking and in an amount you deem perfect. We start by cracking the eggs and separating them into egg yolk and egg whites. Then you will need to summon the forces of the east to get some air into the latter in order to assure that your brownies don't turn into cardboard. We want to go for rather light as a feather, not stiff as a board. Whipping until you have a cloud and then setting aside while we prepare the batter. It's made by melting a high quality dark chocolate with butter and then letting it cool down. Add in your egg yolks and sugar and again summoning the forces of the east. Whip it. We slowly add the flour, and once we have a nice creamy batter, we sprinkle in all the other magic very gently and with a lot of good intentions. For home harmony and coziness, we are going to fold in that cloud of egg whites. And then all there's left to do is put that batter in a lined baking pan, put it in the oven for about 30 minutes at 180 degrees preheated. And if you know anyone in need of cheering up, now you can bring them over a perfectly sinful breakfast. I am well aware that wearing this dark of lipstick I will regret so hard when editing and I see all the unevenness of it. But you and I will have to deal for the sake of the 90s vibe. Oh gosh, this is kind of how I remember my cousin looking. So when we look into the general idea about witchcraft in the 90s, we have a big rise in popularity and a shift. Back in the 80s, witchcraft was still confused with Satanism or satanic practices. Now in the 90s it's much more mainstream, which we can already see in the movies and TV series that are being produced. Sabrina the Teenage Witch, Charmed, Buffy, Practical Magic, The Craft and many more. People get more into anything occult, magical, the divine, feminine. But what has to be very clearly said, the things that we see in pop culture are very heavily influenced by Wicca. Now watch the movie The Craft. I also read a little bit up on a background story. They actually had a Wiccan high priestess and advisor by the name of Pat Devon, and she made kind of sure that certain elements were portrayed right. So in the movie we also find a lot of the Wiccan morality. The message in the movie is also somewhat preachy. It's very much the Wiccan rule of 3. Whatever you put out there will come back to you threefold. It's also considered a bad thing to do witchcraft for your own personal gain, which all of the main character in the movies do, and then they're kind of punished for it. And there's also a couple of other rules in there that seem to be etched into people's heads. Never let anyone read your book of shadows. Personal choice. Never blow out a candle, only snuff out. Really depends on how you look at that. Certain candle colors are only for certain type of spells. Well, again, personal choice, culturally influenced. Having to make sure that you tell a spell exactly what you need it to do. Which, on that one, I feel it is helpful if you already kind of know exactly what you want to achieve, what you want to manifest, because it also makes it easier for you to set those steps in motion. However, sometimes you don't already have a clear solution in your mind, and then I feel it's also okay to put something out there and let it run its course without having to fear that now the world is suddenly crumbling. Pretty sure that's also one of the movies that got people scared of love spells of all sorts. You can also see the Wiccan influence in the ritual they hold, where they actually have a circle. They represent the different elements. They work with typical Wiccan tools like a athame, like a ritual knife. Apart from that, you can also see a little bit of folk magic, for example in a binding spell they perform. We also see glamour magic, of course not in the actual way that glamour magic works, but in a fantasy movie adaptation of it. What I personally really liked about the movie and the portrayal of witchcraft in it is more the empowerment idea, the female circle, the sharing, the supporting each other. There was some healing magic going on. There was some speaking your wishes into existence and sharing them with a group of like-minded people. I'm very excited for my Zion retreat, by the way. It's gonna be so magical. If you haven't watched it, I wouldn't say it's a waste of time. Give it a try, but also keep in mind it's a fantasy movie and it is influenced by a religious form of witchcraft. So I finally watched after all of you told me to look into practical magic, and I have to say, don't hate me. Don't know. I'm not really into rom-coms. Maybe that's why I was a bit put off by the entire... It seemed a bit flat. I like the music. The aunts were pretty fun. I mean, it was cute. It had like cute elements. Would I watch it again? Probably not. I guess it's one of those movies that you kind of have to grow up with. But regardless, let's look where the real witchcraft comes into the movie. Now in this movie we also have like female power. I know there's some male witches out there, and yay you! You're just as magical, but the 90s had that certain type of vibe about it. All about the divine feminine and such. In practical magic you have much more folk elements than Wiccan elements. The aunts specialize in love spells and they're not demonized in there. And you can see the little witchy things like keeping a broom behind the door, which is always tied to either energy in the house or visitors coming in or out of the house. The soap behind the shoulder, protection and abundance, and lavender by the door to attract good fortune and repel bad luck. Of course, there's also a little bit more of that pagan related witchcraft shown when they do like this necromancy ritual and they call on Hecate. So deity work or deity worship is also, but for a very small part of that movie. Yes, both movies are fantasy, and of course the witches in there have some sort of supernatural powers, but for a big part they're also just displayed as normal human beings trying to manifest something in their life, just as we modern witchcraft practitioners also do. As we are doing this full-on 90s TV witch Wiccan style, this ritual is a way more complex and layered one than what you usually see on my channel, starting with requiring a couple of special ingredients and tools, but feel free to adapt or simplify it in any way you see fit, or have fun with this nostalgic, more ritualistic magical setup. First of all, we're preparing our witch's workspace or magical circle. And depending on how much space you have available, you can choose to do this big and use the entire space around you, or you do the mini version on your desk or altar space. A circle is often drawn to create a physical sacred space that helps you get into the mindset, focus your energy, and protect your brain from wandering off into the mundane. But depending on personal belief or path, you might also find more supernatural or religious explanations for the need of a circle in some people's practice. In the middle of the circle, we place all tools we will need throughout the ritual. But before we proceed, we want to cleanse our space. I do so by burning a mixture of magical herbs over a charcoal disc. I chose calendula for mental clarity and hawthorn to open the heart. To drive everything I don't desire out of the space, I walk or trace the circle counterclockwise 7 times and speak out what I want to detach or protect myself from in this moment. The These could be mundane to-dos or worries, distractions, emotions or feelings, judgment, negative self-talk, doubts, or anything else that might stand in the way of you performing this ritual. And once that is done, I am taking my wand, walking or tracing the circle clockwise one time to close it around me and my magical work, visualizing a protective barrier that it provides me. Using a compass, I then determine the different cardinal direction and assign them each a quarter of the circle. Each of the quarters are also associated with a certain element and related qualities, for which I put down representative items and candles in a matching color. While I light a green candle in the north, I call in the elemental powers of earth, asking for trust and endurance. As a representation, I have prepared a pot with soil. I take a moment to ground and center with it in hand and draw Earth's nourishing and nurturing energies by touching the soil, feeling my own heartbeat and appreciating my connection to nature, realizing the ancient wisdom, ever-repeating circles and slow but steady growth and change in Earth. While I light the yellow candle in the east, I call in the powers of the element of air, asking for creativity and inner wisdom. As a representation, I have gathered a seed from a wild plant, grown from a seed that has been carried there through wind and air. I hold it in my hand, realizing the power my ideas have, the force and progress they can set in motion. With my intention for self-empowerment in mind, I plant the seed in the potted soil. While I light the red candle in the south, I call in the powers of the element of fire, asking for strength and transformation. As a representation, I have prepared a charcoal in a fire-safe container. I take some selected herbs in my hands and fuel them with any self-doubt, anxiety and fear that my brain can come up with. Then I burn them in the fire. The ashes will now be used to fertilize the soil in the pot. While I light the blue candle in the west, I call in the power of the element of water, asking for emotional agency and self-love. The chalice filled with water that is to represent this element is now held between my hands, while I allow myself to tap into my feelings at this moment. While I do so, I focus on appreciating the beauty in being guided by one's heart and intuition to go wherever one needs to be. I visualize all this emotional energy flowing into the chalice, and then I pour this water of life over the potted seed to nourish it. After I have completed the summoning of the elemental powers in the circle, I sit for a moment with my book of shadows that I dedicated to personal development to write down some thoughts that came to me during this ritual. And once I feel ready, I open the circle again and step out, feeling stronger, empowered, grounded and centered.